In 1912, a peaceful small town in the heart of Iowa became the scene of a brutal crime. 8 people, including 6 children, were brutally murdered with an axe. The Villisca Ax murders are among the most shocking and mysterious cases in American criminal history. What happened that night? Who could be capable of such a horrific act? Today, we delve into the dark history of the Villisca Ax murders and try to shed light on this decades-old mystery. The Moore family consists of 43-year-old Josiah, his 39-year-old wife Sarah, and their 4 children Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul, aged 5 to 11. They lived together in a large house in the small town of Villisca in Iowa. The family is very religious, as was common at the time, and regularly attends the local church. On the afternoon of June 9, 1912, Mary invites her friends Lena and Ina Stillinger to spend the night with them. That evening, from 8 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., they all visit the local church together to attend Children's Day. They arrive back home around 10 p.m., and the children get ready for bed shortly thereafter. The night seems like any other at first, but when neighbor Mary Peckham is hanging up her laundry at 5 a.m. the next morning, she notices the unusual silence at the Moore house. Normally, you can see the children playing in the yard or hear the family inside. But this morning, it's deathly quiet. When it is still quiet at 7 a.m., Mary becomes suspicious and knocks on their door, but no one opens. The door appears to be locked from the inside, which is unusual and makes her even more concerned. She feeds the family chickens and calls Josiah's shop to see if he is there. When she learns that no one has seen the 43-year-old, she contacts Ross Moore, Josiah's brother. When he arrives, they try to see through the family's windows together, but each of them has been boarded up. Finally, Ross opens the door with a duplicate key. While Mary waits outside, Ross enters the house and makes a gruesome discovery in the guest room. There, he finds the bodies of Lena and Ina Stilling. When the police arrive soon after, the full extent of the horror is revealed to them. Not only the 2 girls who were visiting, but also the entire Moore family has been murdered. The perpetrator used a long black axe that belonged to Josiah for his bloody deed. It was found on the wall in the sewing room near the stairs where Lena and Ina lay. The perpetrator obviously cleaned it meticulously after the fact. It can be assumed that the victims were murdered during the night of June 9th to 10th, between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 lit cigarettes were found in the attic, indicating that the perpetrator waited there for a favorable moment. Josiah's axe as the only weapon used means that the perpetrator entered the family home unarmed. He may have known his way around, and therefore knew that the family would be at church that evening and where he could find a suitable weapon. Many details cannot be reconstructed at this time, but in conclusion, it is assumed that the crime occurred as follows. The perpetrator enters the family home while they are at the church event. He hides in the attic until everyone is asleep. Then he goes first to the bedroom of Josiah and Sarah, since the adults pose the greatest danger to him. He kills them in their beds. Josiah is particularly brutalized and is the only victim to be slain with the blade of the axe, while the blunt side of the axe was used on the others. After that, the murderer causes a bloodbath in the children's room, where he kills the 4 more children. He then goes downstairs and murders Lena and Ina Stillinger. Lena seems to be the only one who is not killed in her sleep, as she has defensive wounds on her arm and was not found in bed. Her nightgown is pushed up and her underwear is missing, indicating a possible sexual assault. The mutilations to Lena and Ina are so extensive that the only thing that allows the police to identify the 2 victims is the Bible they had with them. After the crime, The murderer covers all the windows and mirrors in the house and covers the corpses with clothing. He places kerosene lamps at the foot of the beds, but does not turn them on. A piece of an unknown set of keys is found on the bedroom floor. Bloodstains are later discovered on the kitchen sink, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator washed himself there. There is also a bloodied pot and a plate with half of a meal on it. The culprit seems to have spent some time in the home of his victims. However, he leaves no significant traces and does not steal any valuables, which makes robbery as a motive rather unlikely. The investigation is made more difficult for the officers, however, because by the time the police arrive, countless curious neighbors have already walked through the Moore's house, thus covering up clues. The brutal murder shocks the residents of the otherwise peaceful community. Each of them is afraid of soon becoming the next victim of the ruthless axe murderer. After the murder, numerous witnesses report to the police and talk about strange occurrences on the day and evening of the crime. They are all interrogated in turn. Mary Peckham, the family's neighbor, is the first to be questioned by the police. As she was the first person on the scene and had a good view of the Moore house, the officers hope she will be able to provide valuable information. Unfortunately, Mary doesn't have much to report. She says she last saw the family on her way to church on the evening of June 9th. She went to bed at 8 p.m. and didn't see or hear anything unusual that evening or the next morning. She doesn't know of any enemies the family had and can't understand why such a cruel act was committed. Alice Willard. Since her divorce, Alice Willard has moved back in with her father, who lives very close to the Moore family. Alice reports that she saw two strange men at the Moore's house the day before the crime. That evening, she saw them again while out walking, but this time they were accompanied by two other men. One of them is said to have been the businessman Frank Fernando Jones. Alice reports that she heard one of the men say that they should go after Josiah first, and the rest would be easy. Ed Selly. Next, Ed Selly is questioned. He works with Josiah and was working in his shop the day the bodies were found. He is the person Mary talks to on the phone when she asks about Josiah. Later, she calls him again, tells him about the murders, and asks him to call the police. Ed is shocked by the crime, but he also immediately names a person he thinks could have committed the murder. He tells the police that Josiah had said he felt threatened by his brother-in-law, Sam Moyer. The two had had a bad relationship for a long time, and it had recently worsened. Edward Landers. Edward Landers is with his family in Villisca at the time of the murders, as he is currently visiting his mother, who also lives very close to the Moore family. He also reports that he saw two unknown men on the street the day before the crime. He describes one of them as slight with a mustache and the other as rather tall and strong. That evening, he sees the son of Frank Fernando Jones at the Moore house. At this point, he doesn't think anything of it. An hour later, he goes to bed and is awakened around 11 p.m. by strange noises. He can't place the sounds and goes back to sleep. In retrospect, he says that the noises could well have been the screams of a woman. Based on the testimonies, the investigators initially managed to make little progress. But shortly thereafter, some criminals confessed to the murders only to revoke their confession, making the evidence increasingly unclear. The more panic increases among the residents, the faster they begin to accuse each other indiscriminately. After extensive investigations, only a few suspects remain for the police. Josiah's brother-in-law, Sam Moyer, can be quickly ruled out, even though he allegedly once threatened Josiah, but he has an alibi for the night of the crime. Another suspect is businessman and former MP Frank Fernando Jones. Several witnesses report seeing him or his son at the Moore house. Josiah used to work for Jones before starting his own business in 1908. One possible motive could have been a large order that Josiah recently received. Frank is said to have been angry that it wasn't he who got the job. Others suspect that Josiah may have had an affair with Frank's daughter-in-law, which is why he or his son killed the family. But it remains a matter of speculation. Frank denies any involvement in the murders, and there is no clear evidence against him or his son, so neither of them can be charged with the crimes. After some time, the criminal William Mansfield comes to the investigators' radar. 2 years after the murders, he is accused of murdering his family with an axe in Blue Island, Illinois. However, there is not enough evidence to convict him of the crime. Investigators believe it is possible that he was hired by Frank Fernando Jones to commit the murders because Josiah's business was too much of a competitor. A restaurant owner claims that William told him that he was in Villisca on the night of the tragedy. However, when he was arrested for the murders in 1916, he was able to provide an alibi and was released. Another suspect is Andy Sawyer. Construction worker Thomas Diller reports that Andy arrived in Craston on June 10th, wearing a brown suit, muddy shoes, and wet trousers. He asked him for work, whereupon Thomas hired him. However, he soon realizes that Andy's main interest is the Villisca murders. He has meticulously informed himself about the case and developed numerous theories. At the same time, he is very nervous and always sleeps in his work clothes. Andy's strange behavior also comes to the attention of Thomas's son. As they drive through Villisca together, he is keen to show him how he thinks the killer escaped from the town. He is convinced that he fled across the railroad tracks. And indeed, the police had recently found suspicious footprints there. Andy tells Thomas that he was in Villisca on the night of the crime and fled to Craston because he was afraid of being mistaken for the culprit. Thomas calls the police, and when Andy is arrested, he's found talking to himself, saying,
"I'm going to cut your damn heads off,"
and imitating the motion of an axe. During his interrogation, however, it turns out that Andy was arrested for vagrancy elsewhere at the time of the crime, so he can be ruled out as the murderer. Some people suspect the pastor George Kelly, since it is known that he was in Villisca on the night of the crime. In the past, he attracted attention several times because he suffered a nervous breakdown and was repeatedly accused of voyeurism. Local residents describe him as strange and creepy. Nowadays, it is assumed that he suffered from schizophrenia. After the incident, he shows great interest in the investigation and writes several letters to the police. When questioned by a private detective, George says that he was out walking on the night of the murder and heard noises. Since he is considered mentally ill, he is not initially suspected. In 1914, he is arrested for sexual assault and committed to a psychiatric hospital. 3 years later, he was arrested for the murders and confessed to the crime, but claimed that a voice had ordered him to follow a shadow to the moors and kill them with an axe from the shed. He later retracted his confession and claimed to work for the Queen of England. He is charged with the murder, but it is quickly determined that he cannot be proven guilty of the crimes and that he is not criminally responsible due to his mental state. Although there have been several suspects over the years and more than 1,000 interviews have taken place, none of them can be proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt, and so the Villisca murders remain unsolved to this day. Some even suspect a serial killer as the culprit, because in the year before the crime, several similarly brutal crimes occurred in the Midwest of the USA, which shows some parallels. On September 17, 1911, a family of 4 is slain with an axe in Colorado Springs. The perpetrator meticulously cleans the murder weapon and covers all the windows with clothing and bedding. 2 weeks later, the Dawson family is murdered in Illinois. The murderer covers their bodies with cloths. On October 15th, the Showman family is killed in their sleep with an axe in Ellsworth, Kansas. The bodies are covered and the weapon is cleaned. And 4 days before the massacre in Villisca, Roland and Anna Hudson are killed in their bed with an axe in Paola, Kansas. In addition to the similarities between these crimes and the Villisca murders, all these cases remain unsolved. Did the 8 inhabitants of the Villisca house fall victim to a serial killer? Some residents are still convinced that the souls of the victims will not find peace until the secret of their deaths is finally revealed. After the brutal eightfold murder, the Moore family home stands empty for some time. The neighbors do not want to live there and fear that it might be cursed. The Villisca Bank finally offers new tenants to live in the house rent-free for 6 months. Some prospective tenants move in, but each of them soon leaves the house again, always claiming that it is haunted. It was not until the 1960s that an owner stayed for a longer period. He knew nothing of the house's past and lived there for 32 years without noticing anything strange. When the house was to be demolished in 1994, it was bought by Martha and Darwin Lynn. They want to take advantage of the gruesome past and the mystery surrounding the house, and so they restore it to its 1912 state. Since then, they have been offering tours. Sometimes school classes or interested residents come by, but the house is particularly popular with true crime fans. There are day or night tours. While the history of the house is the main focus of the day tours, after a short introduction on the night tours, guests are given the keys and allowed to stay in the house all by themselves. Many participants in the night tours are specifically looking for paranormal activity. They bring Ouija boards and try to contact ghosts. Some visitors report footsteps in the house or the laughter of children. Others claim to have seen a shadow creeping through the house, similar to what Father George Kelly once described. In 2014, a tourist stabbed himself in the chest during an overnight tour and claimed that a shadow had ordered him to do so. It is likely that the Villisca House's ghostly reputation is just good PR, and that your own thoughts can play tricks on you during a night in a haunted house. After all, someone lived in the house for 32 years without knowing about the murders and never noticed any shadows. What is clear, however, is that the Villisca House is still very popular today and continues to attract numerous guests. However, it should not be forgotten that it is not just an exciting attraction, but the place where 8 people, including 6 children, lost their lives in a cruel way. And that brings us to the end of today's video. What do you think of converting a former crime scene into a tourist attraction? Would you also like to spend a night there? Feel free to write me a comment about it, and you'll also be supporting this channel. If you want to support me even further, feel free to leave a thumbs up and a like and check out the other videos. Every interaction supports this channel enormously. You can find the link to my other socials in the info box. By other socials, I mean Instagram or Discord. Otherwise, there is not much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, or whenever you are watching the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then. Ciao, guys.